My name is Bob Willett. I'm currently in Errol, New Hampshire. I was born just down the river a little ways in Berlin, New Hampshire. I think our government is a necessity, but I think our government at the same time is getting a little fat. They seem to have lost touch with the common folks. You know, it seems to be all big money and to hell with everybody else. I'm not sure if it's lobbyists or special interest or what it is, but the money's coming from places that really don't seem to be disclosed. And it's none of our business, I guess. I don't know. Well, I'm 54 years old. I haven't missed an election. My dad had battleships blown out from under him. And that's kind of why I don't miss an election. But what's really annoying about it is I'm 54 years old. I've been hearing about campaign finance reform for way too long now. I've been hearing about that for 30 years. Come on. Why can't they move forward on it? They're too busy with their parlor games.
My name is Dan Weeks, and I'm the Executive Director of Open Democracy, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan group here in New Hampshire that's organizing the New Hampshire Rebellion marches across New Hampshire to get big money out of politics. And we're walking to send a message to the candidates and to the citizens that our votes aren't for sale, that here at the start of the New Hampshire presidential primary, they've got to take notice that we care about this issue enough to freeze our butts off and hit the streets and talk about it with anybody who will listen.
New Hampshire is such an important state in the primary because the first in the nation presidential primary is held here. You have the Iowa caucus, but New Hampshire is the first primary state, and that means that it's January 12th, 2015, and we have candidates for 2016 here. They've been here last month. They're going to be here all year. And what they do in New Hampshire, they really don't do as much in other states. They go into living rooms, they go into coffee shops, they go into bars. So they're accessible to the people here more than they are anywhere else, and they're accountable to the people, and we can shape their discussions, we can shape the media discussion, and we can shape the government that we want to see.
When you think of the word corruption, the first thing people typically think of is things like bribery or engaging in a criminal act. And that's thinking about corruption at the individual level. But our framers actually were much more concerned about corruption at the institutional level, not the individual level. Well, in that sense, the American democracy has been corrupted, obviously, because we have a Congress which is dependent not on the people alone, as Madison said we would be, but increasingly dependent on the funders of campaigns, this tiny, tiny fraction of the 1%, whose interests are different from the interests of the people in general. And so therefore that too is a corruption of the institution of Congress.
I'd like it if people kind of like me represented me, people who shared a bit of my life experience, who knew where I was coming from. But the truth is, if you want to run for Congress today or any serious office, the first two questions you have to ask aren't kind of who you are, what are your values, what's your experience, what do you actually bring. The first two questions you've got to answer are, do you have it or can you raise it? It's all about the money. To get elected to Congress, you need on average $1.5 million. To get elected to the Senate, you need over $10 million. So we can't even consider people to represent us in public office unless they're millionaires or know a bunch of millionaires who will fund their campaigns.
So in order to get that money, it's provided to them by a very small fraction of society. So that fraction of society gives politicians money if they want to be in office. If they're going to be in office and continue to get money, they have to make policy decisions in favor of their funders, and are then able to give them more money the next election cycle. People say, well, it's not going to have a corrupting effect or things like that. How could it not? The problem is undue influence. So if you want a representative democracy, everybody has to be able to have some say. If you have a few people that have a say, that's an oligarchy. So that's the problem. Now, the mechanism through which they're facilitating that is campaign finance. Average citizens, average economic citizens, have little to no influence on the outcomes of their outcomes of policy decisions. Their preferences have little to no influence on the outcomes of policy decisions, which means if all of us median income people really want to, let's say, have gun laws changed, right? Unless special interests and people that have a lot of money, the economic elite, want that as well, it will never happen. And it doesn't matter if we have 0% of people that want it in the median income or 100%. The probability of it affecting policy never changes. But if you look at the probability, like the statistical probability of some policy outcome versus the preferences of economic elites or the preferences of special interests, they're highly correlated.
Well, if you think about issues that people care about, on the left and on the right, they care about climate change on the left, healthcare reform on the left, they care about tax reform on the right, or the debt on the right, quickly you recognize that we will not be able to address any of those issues on the left or on the right until we address this fundamental issue first. So the point isn't that this corruption is the most important issue. It's not the most important issue. It's just the first issue. If we don't solve it, we can't solve anything.
So if you're someone who's interested in climate change, interested in doing something to save the environment, then it's a real problem for you that a lot of the folks in Congress take a lot of money from oil companies, from natural gas, from groups whose primary interest is not protecting the environment. On the flip side, if you're someone who cares about tax reform, who wants to simplify the tax code, who wants to make our taxes make some sense, the folks who write the tax software that make a ton of money off TurboTax, off that, they have on multiple times stopped legislation that would streamline the tax code, that would make it easy to file online, that would simplify the lives of ordinary citizens in a huge way. But they have a vested monetary interest in keeping the system as it is. A corrupt system is a system that's not working towards the ends that it was meant to achieve. So when you talk about a corrupt government, you have a government that's supposed to represent the people, that's supposed to make sure that it's minimally invasive in taking care of our needs. And when we talk about a corrupt government, we're talking about a government that's no longer accountable to those needs and no longer ultimately accountable to the people. So we're not saying there's bribery in the back rooms or there's any sort of quid pro quo corruption. What we're saying is that this system isn't doing what it was designed to do anymore. It was designed to represent us, and it's not doing that. And that's why we're out here. That's why we're walking in this freezing cold winter, and that's why we're working to do something about it.
It's easy to say, people are greedy and there's some greedy people that are doing this and congressmen are just, looking out for themselves and things like this. And that's the wrong direction, I think, right? The issue is that we have to have systems that are better than the individuals that exist in them, right? So then the question is, what do you do about it?
It is 1,000th as hard as taking on racism or sexism, problems which our parents took on, and after many, many years we make progress on. This problem is just a problem of incentives. And we can change this overnight. It doesn't even take a constitutional amendment to fix the biggest part of this problem. So this movement is not going to have a Martin Luther King. It's not going to have one leader who inspires millions. What this movement needs is 1,000 leaders from very different backgrounds and very different contexts. People leading people in the church, people leading libertarians, people leading people who care about the environment. Everybody recognizing that they all have a role to play and getting their own to recognize this fundamental problem. That's the critical leadership we need. And so this is not a left-wing issue, it's not a right-wing issue, it's an American issue.